What was daily life during when you're growing up during the Depression? What was going on?
Daily life during the Depression, it was rather a basic type of a life. Uh, there was no automation. Everything is really you carried or pushed it because there wasn't anything left. We have no cell phones, no TV. Radio was very young, and radio would fade. Records were not very good, so it was a non-technological stage. And people like me, and we were the whiz kids in my day, just by building radios right now, which is very basic. So I think life it was comfortable, but you just didn't have the money to throw away. You had to, when you wanted to buy a camera in those days, you had to think about it a long time. What do I really want? What do I need? See? It's now, right now, you say, okay, come in, give me the best, and flap down the money and walk out. It wasn't like that.
So Lancaster was doing better than the rest of the country during
No
the
question.
Depression. Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
Much better than Chicago and the big cities really got hurt. I mean, people were in lines blocks long. Where Lancaster, our population was less than 100,000, and everybody had gardens and that sort of thing. So you grew a lot. In the summertime, you were almost self-independent.
Um,
You had a chicken coop and things.
Tell me about how you made money when you were 12.
Well, actually, I was very fortunate because I had a paper route, and the route was quite large, and I always had spending money. So my dad never asked for any of the money. I mean, I never had to buy anything, and he took care of my needs. So my money was I could use it the way it saw fit.
Yeah.
So a big thing was go out and buying a Sunday. I mean,
And you guys you delivered papers, rain or shine, huh?
right, no question about that.
And
The weather was always a challenge.
yeah. What was it like delivering papers during the winter?
Well, in the winter it was really tough because actually it would get very cold in the winter, and you could not use gloves when you're carrying papers because your gloves just couldn't pull the paper out of it. So you had to do it with your hands. And I remember many a time coming back when your hands are real cold, we get down to the spring house and dip them in spring water, kind of bring them up to temperature.
Yeah. Did you grow up during any part of the First World War?
Not the first.
Not the first, okay. What was the mood at the country at the time during the Depression? Was it kind of negative feelings towards the government, or?
In Lancaster, I think the feelings were always very positive. I mean, I don't recall. I don't see the green light there again.
It's still recording.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
But I think people looked to the government almost as their uncle to help them, really. They were, Hoover was, in their mind, a disaster. Roosevelt definitely was the savior. I think most everybody in the country thought Roosevelt was a great person. So everybody thought he was great except my scoutmaster. He was.
When did military operations begin overseas? Not with America, but with just when you heard over your radio stuff was going on.
See,
Or when did the U.S. know that things were going on in Europe?
the Germans and the English were always kind of had a non-firefight opposition going on. Germans were definitely expanding, and they kept promising then that this is going to be the last expansion, and the British went along with it. So Germany really had its own way, and but here in the United States, it was so far away that we did not feel the pressure. And definitely, here's another thing that's interesting too, is that we did not have much in the way of military. We had, at that time, we only had 11 B-17s in the whole U.S. Army Air Corps.
Wow.
I mean, more of them were shot down in a day in World War II. And so I think, like the Canal Zone, they had only two groups there guarding that. One group in the east and the other in the west. So it's, I also remember that a lot of time we'd carry rocks in boxes with handles on because we didn't have the vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So it was it was a very frugal type of military organization.
And tell me about, when did you first get into radio and radio communications and stuff like that?
My interest in radio,
When you were a kid?
I don't remember where it began. I was always interested in radio and astronomy.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one of my merit badges was the astronomy merit badge, and it took me a whole year to really get to plot the planets and the constellations. So that was way back as far as I can recall. So somewhere around maybe 10, 11 years old when this interest came. And then I was fortunate to go to a radio school taught by the CCC. And I built my first radio when I was about maybe 14. It was a super regenerative shortwave station, and I hand wired my own coils, and so it was around 40 meters. And then Berlin, Germany, and also England were on 40 meters at night. So I'd sit up all night and listen to them. And there you got the feeling that there was some kind of a military disturbance going on. Mm-hmm. But that was so to say. When was I interested? It was early. I don't recall it. I don't remember why either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was there.
Okay. Were you always kind of interested in the military? Were you kind of a kid just interested in the military, or when did that spark your interest?
I always wanted to. My dream as a kid was to be an engineer and an army officer, and I'm not even sure when that particular time was apparent. That was probably also in the early 30s.
Mm-hmm. And what caused you to tell me about when you were in the tobacco field? That story about when you.
Well, actually,
what caused you wanted to be in the military?
See, being the oldest boy, I really was at the brunt of raising tobacco. See, for example, in planting, my dad would drive the planter, and my mother would also occupy a planter seat, and I occupied the other. And so, being the oldest then, I planted tobacco, I suckered tobacco, I hoed tobacco, I speared tobacco, and we did everything on that. And I remember sometimes back in the early 30s, when we're out here, it's August and it's really hot. But those days you hoed, you didn't pull weeds, you didn't have weed killer. You went out there with a hoe and you hoed it so you get rid of the weeds and also got oxygen down to the roots. And this big dirigible came over the horizon. I said, that's for me. Mm-hmm. This is not my life.
Well, so that was a plane?
Right.
That was an airplane you saw?
No, it was a dirigible. It was a big, it's bigger than a blimp.
Oh, okay.
See, a dirigible was a very large blimp.
Was it a military blimp?
Oh, it was Navy.
Oh, okay.
And the Navy had them to patrol the seas and to observe anti-submarine warfare was for that.
Okay.
So they had them on the East Coast and the West Coast.
Yeah. And then, what was joining the military like back then? Were there recruiters, or was there a station that you just went to sign up, or?
Yes, they had a recruiter at the post office.
Okay.
And I remember going to Lancaster, and I wanted to go to Hawaii, but that was closed, and they only had Panama and Philippines open.
And which one did you sign up for?
Oh, I signed up for Panama, and
Okay.
thank God for that, because otherwise you'd been right in the Bataan Death March. I remember when I went down to enlist, there was another young man from around here, and he said he wanted to go the furthest way he could. I never heard from him again, but all of those people were overrun by Japan and the Philippines.
Yeah. So you joined at the age of 18 and 19.
I was 18.
And when was that?
August 3rd, 1939.
Okay. Was the United States having any part in the war yet?
Oh no, definitely not.
So you joined before
Yeah.
you even
No,
thought?
no one ever dreamed. No one ever dreamed of going to be in a war.
Okay.
I thought that I was enlisting for a tour, and then I'd get enough money to go to college. But it never entered my mind that we would be at war.
So why did you join, and when did you tell your parents? When did you tell your parents, and what did they say?
The reason why I thought this was an opportunity that I could take advantage of, because the going to college at that time would have been very difficult. I didn't have a car, and I didn't, you'd have to work and do that. And in those days, working through college was not the easiest thing to do. And when I finally did it, I went down to Atlantic City, and I saw this big sign, joining the Army Air Corps, and I came back and I said to my mother, "Mom, I'm going to join the Army." And she said, "What do you want to do that for?" And then 26 years later, I said, "Mom, I'm going to retire from the Army." She said, "What do you want to do that for?" So, but they were always supportive. But,
Yeah.
That was kind of typical.
Yeah. Did you have a choice of what job you signed up for when you joined the military at the time?
Well, I signed up for communications, and and I was kind of like the whiz kids of that day,
Mm-hmm.
and so they really did put me in communications.
Yeah.
So, and I moved quite quickly through the ranks, because communication was brand new.
Yeah.
And not many people understood it. Not many people wanted to do it. But it was just like I say, it was high tech.
Yeah.
But that day we didn't know what it was or call it that.
How long was the school and things like that for communication?
I did not go to any school.
Okay.
I
It was just on the job
I had
training.
this CMCC course where I built a radio. But the Army did not send me to radio school, although they had good school. They sent me right directly to Panama.
Mm.
And I was assigned then to the line, and then I was working with a lieutenant, the graduate from VPI, and we installed the first radio link across the isthmus.
Wow.
So I got unusual assignments like that.
Yeah. And then tell me about where you were when you heard that Pearl Harbor was attacked, and what the mood was and your feeling.
Actually, it's very interesting. I was back here in the States on leave, because at that time things were getting hot, and the military then said, "Well, we're not going to permit you to leave. We're going to extend you, but we'll send you back for a vacation." that Sunday or that day, I went up with my mother and my future wife. We went up to above Harrisburg to our Uncle George, who was a doctor, and he built his own house out of stone, and we were visiting, and so we come back, and Frank said, "Hey, the Japs hit the Pearl Harbor." I said, "What?" And no one would believe it, but so it was to us that was not in on the secrets. I mean, it was a surprise.
Yeah. So even for you, you were in communications, but you still had
Right.
no idea.
Well, I was in squadron communications, so therefore our communications level was not as high.
Lower,
See, so,
So did you report immediately to your duty station, or what happened after?
well, that was kind of interesting too, because I reported up to at New York and Brooklyn Army Base, and I went up and no ships were available, and they'd send me home. So I'd go up and they send me back home for 3 days, and so it was about almost 6 weeks before I ever got on a ship to get back to Panama. So, but the first 6 weeks of the war, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the feeling in the U.S. at the time when after Pearl Harbor struck?
Well, I think the feeling there was everybody must take part. I mean, this is it. The women worked in the factories, and like my father and mother, they worked as air observers, and all the men felt we had to be part of the army. We get into it. We couldn't sit on the lines. So I think it was probably more. I saw more thinking in the positive section of the country I ever saw in my whole life. I mean, that was it. That was the thing to do.
Yeah.
It was your duty.
You think that's people had a bigger sense of duty back then?
Oh,
than
no
they do
question
now?
about it.
Yeah.
And that they felt it was their duty. And people
Yeah.
said, "What do you do? What's your duty?" I mean, you never gave it a second thought.
Yeah. So when you finally were sent back to Panama, what was your feeling at the time? Did you want to get into, some action, or did you want to
Well,
get?
yes. See, I had to go back and apply then for a different assignment from there. I couldn't apply for an assignment here.
Yeah.
For example, I went back then and applied then for OCS.
So you went back to Panama,
Right.
applied for OCS,
Yeah, and as soon as I got there, and
and you went to OCS while the war was starting.
before, yeah, I
Or
went
while we were.
just a few months after World War II. I was in OCS.
Okay. How long was OCS, and when did you go
the
to Europe?
OCS was 3 months.
Okay.
And then they sent me to radar. They signed me as a radar officer in Florida, and by that time the requisition took effect, and they were just turning them out like mad. And I thought the war would be over before I could get in it. So then I volunteered to go to the Army Air Corps again. I was enlisted there, so I volunteered, and then I was transferred over. And it was about, I guess, a few months in the States training with it, and then we went overseas.